Do you feel stuck, exhausted, or overwhelmed? Listen, sometimes I feel that way too. And truth be told, I used to feel that way almost always. Fortunately, I developed a system and I created boundaries that took me from feeling overwhelmed to being empowered in almost every aspect of my life and my business. I'm pretty excited to share with you that I've taken this system that saved not only my sanity, but has helped countless clients create the life of their dreams. And I put it together in one easy to navigate, self-guided audio course. You like audio, right? You're listening to this podcast right now. So what if I told you that in just 1 month, you can go from unsure, unorganized, and unmotivated to knowing exactly what you want and how to make it happen? Doors are open right now for my signature audio course, Chaos to Clarity. I only offer this course twice a year, so don't miss this exciting opportunity because you won't have access again until the very end of the year. It's not too late for 2019. You can absolutely kick yourself into high gear and make all of those dreams come true. With the course, you receive 16 downloadable audio lessons. You can listen to them whenever you want, wherever you want. You also get weekly group coaching sessions and a digital workbook to record your progress. And you even have a chance to earn a one-on-one coaching session with me after the completion of the course. Everything you want is just on the other side of uncomfortable. So join me to go from chaos to clarity, and let's build your roadmap to personal and professional success. Sign up right now while there are still spots left. Classes start on April 17th. You can sign up on my website at vickeryandco.com/C2C. Again, that's vickeryandco.com/C2C. Get that spot secured today, and I will see you there. All right, now here's today's episode.
Honesty, discomfort, uncertainty.
You are listening to The Brave Files, real stories from people living courageously. You can listen to the show anywhere you enjoy podcasts, and we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on Apple Podcasts. It really does make a difference, and we appreciate it. Now here's your host, Heather Vickery.
Hello, everyone. This is Heather Vickery. Welcome to The Brave Files. If you've been listening to the show regularly, you already know I am passionate about social justice, and I spend a lot of time learning and educating myself, knowing that there's always more, so much more to know and more to do. Recently, I read the book Wright, Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. As soon as I started reading the book, I knew I wanted to have more conversations and conversations with other people who have read the book. It was an eye-opening and powerful read. It's led to many valuable and uncomfortable conversations. Because of this book, I reached out to my social media platform and asked, who do you know that's read this book? I want to be connected to people. So a mutual friend introduced me to today's guest. Zachary Wright is an assistant professor of practice at Relay Graduate School of Education, serving Philadelphia and Camden. Zach and I were connected because he also read Wright, Fragility, and he did some really extraordinary social experiments with it, and he's here to tell us about it. Before we begin, I just want to say that Zach and I are two white people talking about race and racism. While we both have done a lot of work in this space, we also readily admit we will not always get it right. We are ever learning and growing. And if you want to have further conversation with either me or Zach, we invite you to reach out to us and engage in those powerful conversations. So this should be a really interesting episode. Zach, welcome to the Brave Files.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I am excited. We got this going really quickly because we had a very powerful, short conversation. And I said, we have to do this for other people to hear. And also because I just couldn't wait to talk to you more. So very briefly, can you give us your background as an educator, and then sort of what led you into this level of study and work?
Sure. So I've spent the last 15 or so years in classrooms ranging from preschool up through high school. And I spent the last 9 years in teaching 11th and 12th grade English in West Philadelphia, both in the school district and in a charter network. And in all of those years of teaching high school, I only taught students, Black and brown students. I never taught the white students, just the way our culture is so segregated, particularly within certain areas of Philadelphia.
Okay, so wait, just to be clear, you never had a white student, not one?
Not teaching high school, no.
Not teaching high school, and you're a white teacher. How many, I'm going to let you get back to it, but how many of the teachers in the school with all black and brown children were also black and brown?
The vast minority.
Yeah.
It is definitely a problem. I think nationwide, Black male educators make up about 2%, I believe the number is, of the teaching force.
Wow.
And my former principal and mentor, Sharif Al-Mekki, who is the founder of the Black Male Education Convening, BMEC, does the work to increase that number because it is a problematic situation.
Yes, it is.
Have white teachers predominantly teaching students, Black and brown students. And one of the problematic things you find is, and I can't speak to this from my own experience, obviously as a white man, but one of the things that I have heard is that white men are generally funneled into disciplinary roles.
Of course. Of course. That's so American, isn't it?
Yes. So there's a lot of work to be done in that way, which led me to doing the work on myself and my cultural competency. So my classroom could be a place of liberation, not oppression.
Yeah. Good for you. So were you greeted warmly by your high school students, or were they not so into you?
No, absolutely. I think students have an unbelievable ability to sniff out the truth. They know when someone is there for them and when someone is there for a check. I got along amazingly with my students. I think in part because I was not the best student myself growing up. So that I was able, I think sometimes teachers who have this amazing academic background of straight A's have a hard time connecting with students who struggle because they didn't struggle. No, but my students were open and receptive. And once they realized who I was and that why I was there, then we connected. And I spent 9 years at one school and taught the first graduating class up for the last 9 years. So I knew generations of families. I taught 3 siblings, 4 siblings. So I became a known entity within the space. But that trust had to be earned and re-earned every year. And that does not mean I did not make mistakes. I made mistakes every single year and attempted to learn from them and get better and not make them again.
Yeah, I feel like this is slightly getting off track before we've gotten started, but that's a conversation I have a lot, both with my kids, with my clients, with everyone. Were you able to handle those mistakes by apologizing directly to those that you had made mistakes towards?
Yes, instantly in the moment. So I'm thinking about one moment, extremely powerful moment, teaching Beloved, Toni Morrison's Beloved, which is an automatically problematic situation. Again, right? A white man teaching Beloved to a group of Black and brown students is a problematic situation. But what I attempted to do was name that before we even began the novel. Like, we need to name the situation and we need to name all the problems that go with it. But there's a part later in the text wherein Setha is found by a school teacher, her former slave master, who has found her after she has run away. And it's the only part of the book where it is spoken from the white point of view. And within that point of view, the N word is used often.
Ooh.
And I paused and I asked my class, what should I do in this moment? As a teacher, as a learning community, as we read this, how should we read this? How should I read this word? And we came to the conclusion that I should not read it. Agreed. Later, I had a conversation again with my principal, and he pointed out that maybe that it was a mistake to ask because that is not their responsibility.
That's right. You put the pressure on them. Okay.
Now, I still, and again, this gets back to one of the words, uncertainty. I'm still uncertain as an English teacher where the truth is in that word, because Toni Morrison purposely used that word.
Right.
And that word is worthy of discussion. But I'm uncertain where the conversation falls and whose word it is to use within that context.
So I find this really fascinating. I hope that we have some people listening that have thoughts on this, because I 100% understand your principal saying that's not their responsibility. They're not here to make that decision for you. nor are they here to educate you, right? I 100% understand that. And yet I would think there's something empowering about having the ability and the autonomy to say, no, man, you don't get to use that word.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the powerful things about that classroom was just like, yes, they should not have been asked because it is not their responsibility. And it is so infrequent that a teacher asks a student
Right.
how they want their learning to proceed.
Yeah.
So in that moment, it was, again, we'll come to this good, bad binary. It was not an either or, it was a yes and situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is so powerful because we do have a lot of conversations on this show about the fact that there are conflicting things happening all the time. And you can feel and think all the things. It can be good and it can be bad and it can be right and it can be wrong for different reasons all at the same time. And within this context, I think that's really, really interesting. Okay. So when did you read White Fragility?
I read White Fragility probably 3 months ago, so not that long ago.
Okay, well, this is fresh then.
Yeah.
And what did you think of it when you started reading, when you read the first part? And for those of you that haven't read it, please do. But she talks right away about this book is written for the white liberal person, probably a woman, more than anything. But we've got Zach here, and I'm glad to know that white men are reading it as well. And that spoke volumes to me because that's me, right? And what that says is you've got a lot of work to do. You think you're woke and you're not. So as you're starting to read this book, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking that much of what I'm reading, I've heard before because of the work we did at the school I worked in. We did a lot of cultural competency work. And at the same time, I had that thought, I would think, and because you're thinking that, you're the problem.
Right.
Because you're thinking like, yeah, I got it. Like, already you don't. So I felt some of that. I felt things that were very understandable. For instance, the idea of just white, the one of the prime examples of white privilege being the idea that we do not consider ourselves white. That to me is a very powerful idea.
Right, that we don't have race.
Right, that we can think outside of it. And that to me was an extremely powerful idea. The most challenging part of the book for me is what to do with this information. What steps do I take?
Yeah.
And particularly, what steps do I take in terms of the decisions I make for my children's education?
Yeah.
That to me is where the rubber hits the road and where I go from being an advocate to being a hypocrite.
Absolutely. I am so with you on that. That was probably my biggest challenge as well as, okay, now what do I do with this? And I'm much like you. There were several things where I'm like, okay, I've heard that. I know that. I get that. That makes sense. There were some things that I was like, oh, that hadn't occurred to me. And essentially the book talks about the fact that we are a racist society. I really value she separates the difference between obvious outward hatred when you see somebody say or do something violent. If that's your definition of racism and being racist, well, then many of us aren't. But that isn't what racism is. In fact, do you have it? Do you have her definition of racism? I don't have that open on that page in my book.
I don't, but essentially, from what I recall, the idea is that racism is when you add power to discrimination, right? Prejudice is the thoughts we have in response to people we don't know. Discrimination is when it takes action, and racism is when that action becomes power through systemic structures.
Right, which is beyond most of our control. That doesn't mean to say there aren't things we can change and do differently, but it's already been built that way.
Correct.
So that is really powerful. What it instantly shifted for me, I've never shied away from these conversations, but I'm able to have them in a more alert way and ask deeper questions when I'm having conversation and point things out. Like, well, you know that this is racist. And it's interesting to me the people who get themselves all in a kerfuffle about it and those who are like, oh yeah, I know that. And I'm fully aware of that. And not that they're okay with it. Like they work to shut it down in their heads. But, as a coach, even I tell everybody the very first step is to be aware of your habits and your patterns. Once you're aware of them, you can do something to shift them. If you're not willing to acknowledge they exist, there's nothing you can do about it.
Right. And I think one of the things is important too, is to acknowledge that this is work to be done. And because it's work to be done, it assumes that we don't start from a great place.
Right.
But that does not mean you're an awful human being.
Right.
Right. You can be a person who makes mistakes all day long and makes assumptions all day long, still be a good person, and now wants to learn and change.
Yeah.
That's, I think, is where the importance lies. I think a lot of people, when she brings this up, she calls it the good, bad binary. Well, if there's racism, I can't be that because that's bad. So I can't be that. And it's interesting, watch my kindergartner, my oldest son's in kindergarten, go through Black History Month, and we talk about racism. They said, racism is bad. And I'm like, yes, it is. And I'm also hearing in his brain, like, and therefore I cannot be that.
Right.
And it's a way of compartmentalizing the conversation without making us complicit.
Absolutely. And there's a huge portion of the book dedicated to that. Your oldest is in kindergarten. My youngest is in kindergarten. And I am grateful that we are having these conversations in my house as well. And I think folks think, white folks, because we have choices in the matter, think that, oh, it's too difficult to talk about. It's scary, or it's hard for them to understand. And it's not. Yes, you have to talk to 5 and 6 year olds differently than you talk to 30, 40, 50 year olds, but you can still approach this conversation. So how do you talk to your son about this?
The part of the book that really jumped out at me in terms of talking to our kids, she brings up an anecdote walking through a supermarket of a white parent and their white child walking through a supermarket. And the white child pointing out a black or brown person saying, oh, look, they're black or brown. And the parent going, shh, we don't talk about that.
Yeah, like it's bad or shameful.
Right. And the implication of shame means we don't talk about it, and we don't talk about it, so therefore things become perpetuated.
Yeah.
So the other day, my son said something that took me aback. We were watching the British baking show.
I'm a fan, by the way.
Which is, it is what it is. So we're watching it, and my son, on the particular episode, one of the characters who leaves the tent, right, who gets kicked off the show, is black. And my son says something to the effect of, oh, they don't do well on this show. We were driving at the time when he said this. So I took a breath, and I had to think about, all right.
What do we mean? What are we getting into?
And more so, what do I do?
Yeah.
I don't just keep going because this needs to be addressed, but I don't also want to shame it in a way that this conversation never happens again.
Right.
I very gently pulled over and I asked Leo, my son, I said, what do you mean? He said, people like that. I said, what do you mean? Like, what are you seeing? And he said, with that hair. I'm like, what else do you mean? The color skin. I'm like, okay, so you're talking about black and brown people on this show. He said, yeah, they don't do well. And I said, what makes you say that? So I really tried to tap into my teacher self of asking rather than telling.
Always asking.
Right. So, what do you mean by that? And he mentioned, because my son is on the autism spectrum and has a memory that is just ridiculous. So he'll say something like, well, because that other character on season 2 forgot to put his almonds in his almond cake and he was black too. I said to him, okay, so I think, Leah, what you picked up was a pattern, which is something you're really good at.
Right.
And I think what you did was you made an assumption based upon that pattern. And I wonder if that assumption was correct. And we started talking about, well, I assume that everybody who is tall runs fast. And Leo said, well, that's not true. I was like, oh, so that's an assumption that's not true. So we kind of broke it down in that regard. I am positive I did not do it great. And I am positive that I made mistakes. Could have done it way better. And it's what I did in the moment.
Yeah, but the fact that you did do something in the moment, if more of us can do that and choose to do that, we can change the conversation. So there's the good, bad binary. For me, the one that resonated the most was the concept of color blindness. And I am a child of the colorblind generation. It was for sure the shush and the thing. We don't want to make anybody feel bad or embarrass them. Of course, it never occurred to us that why would they be embarrassed or feel bad because they have a different skin tone than we do. And, I grew up in Indianapolis, and upon reflection, and I've only been doing this work and this reflection for the last couple of years, almost all of my friends were Black or Jewish. I didn't have very many white Christian friends. I don't know why that is. It was maybe school demographics and maybe just who I connected with, but it was never talked about. And so I'm grateful. I'm super grateful that I grew up amongst diversity and that it felt safe to me. But now I look back and I think I never, ever had any knowledge that their experience was different than mine. Nothing.
Yeah, I hear you. I grew up, I'm trying to think if this makes sense. I grew up within segregated diversity. And what I mean by that is I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, diverse as anything, and yet went to a private school that was predominantly white and more so predominantly wealthy. So it was a segregated experience within one of the most diverse areas in the country, right? So it's a strange thing. But I gotta say, we did talk about race and injustice a lot growing up, but we didn't speak of it in the way that actually put ourselves in the conversation. We spoke about how racism was wrong and how awful it was, but never, and how public education needs to be supported, etc. All the while going to private school.
Right.
So it was a good conversation, but that also a conversation that was made safe by keeping us out of the conversation.
Right, because it wasn't about you. That was back to the good, bad binary. The bad folks did this and you weren't. You weren't bad.
Right. And I think the way, and I've written about this before, the way we teach the civil rights era, particularly the way we teach Martin Luther King, has been so completely whitewashed.
Oh, yeah.
That we can look at Dr. King and we can say, yes, look how far we've come, and never in the same sentence talk about, look what we used to do to our Americans, our Black and brown Americans. Look at what we did to them,
and still do,
and do to them. Correct.
Yeah.
So it's a challenging thing. Yeah, the color blindness thing is powerful. I taught the new Jim Crow to my high school seniors for several years. And we would talk about it a lot, because one of the also problems is a lot of people think just because my students are all Black and brown, they all have the similar ideas, and that's false. Right? Complexion does not equal sameness. So a lot of them would say, no, colorblindness is the way to be. That's the goal. So it was an interesting conversation to have with those students as well.
And I mean, it could be the goal if we didn't have an entire nation built on racist ideas.
Yeah, and I think yes, and
I like that. Yes, and are you an improv guy?
No, so that's actually something that we've done in our school. We did this dialectic initiative, which particularly helps when you're trying to have restorative meetings with students. So you say something like, "So I hear that you are frustrated with what I said, and the way you responded made me feel disrespected as well." It was a way of honoring both sides. But anyway,
powerful.
Yeah, right. And also, I think if we were truthful with ourselves, and that colorblindness is an impossibility. Right.
It does such a disservice. So my kids today, this episode is going to air in a few weeks. But today is the first day of March, and last week was the anniversary of the tragic death of Trayvon Martin, and our local high school students staged a walkout, and they invited the middle school students, and I have children in the middle school, to march with them. I have touch and go feelings on these planned school protests and walkouts. While I love that we're teaching the kids that they can do this, there's no risk. And to me, if there's no risk involved in a protest, there's no pain. You're not, what are you working for? So my
Right.
kid texted me and said, can I do this? And I said, yes. And you don't have to ask me to protest. If it's important enough to you, you better be willing to risk me being upset that you made that choice. Sidebar. But when they came home, and we always sit and talk about our day for dinner, and that same daughter said, so we did a walkout today for a boy who had been killed by a black boy who'd been killed by police. And I said, oh, but wait, Trayvon Martin wasn't killed by police. And I then went on to share the story, and it was an incredible conversation. It was the first of a kind in my household, where we really talked about, why was this child profiled? What would have happened if it had been a white child with a hoodie and a hood over his head? What gives somebody the right to think they have power? Even if, and I know nothing, I was not there, as were you, nobody was there except for those two men. Even if Trayvon Martin got angry and got violent, was there ever a reason to shoot him? And of course, my children agree that there was not, and all of this. And we were able to talk about assumptions, and we were preconceived biased and all of that in a way that some of it they knew and some of it they hadn't. And I was able to say, we are in a racist society. Everything is built to the betterment of people who look like us and the detriment of people who don't. And that isn't for you to feel guilty about, but it is for you to help change.
Yes. And I think one of the most powerful things you just said was, it's nothing for you to feel guilty about. And I think one of the reasons why that's powerful is because guilt is, one, ineffective. It does nothing. And two, it's self-serving, right? It still makes the conversation,
because it shuts you down,
right? And it still makes me the center of the conversation,
right?
If I am guilty, I'm talking about my feelings. I am not talking about the very real realities and impact of other on other people, right? I'm talking still about myself.
Yeah.
Trayvon Martin has come up in my classroom a lot, and has come up, and I think was a major event in how I perceive myself in this work as a teacher and as trying to become a better person. I remember, and I recently wrote about this as well. Recently, after Trayvon Martin was killed, we were having a conversation in class, and a student asked me, like, "Mr. Wright, are you racist?" Which is not the first time I've been asked that, and I've asked the question almost every year, and I think it's because we do the work in our classroom to create a level of trust and honesty where that question is okay to be asked, and
without fear of retribution.
Without fear, yeah. and with the knowledge that a conversation is going to ensue that will be powerful and honest and true.
Right.
So the student asked, "Mr. Wright, are you racist?" And I stopped, and I was thinking, and I'm thinking, like, how do I navigate the situation?
Right.
Because 2 seconds earlier, 28 18-year-olds were packing up their bags to go, and now 28 students are silent and still looking at me.
Right. And so, it doesn't feel good to say, yeah.
No. The heat was rising. The sweat was appearing, and all those. My white fragility was kicking in all its ferocity.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yes, absolutely. I'm a white man in America. There is nothing else I could be. And there was silence. And I said, all right, what's up? Let's sit down for a second. And so we sat down, and many students said something. They all disagree with me.
Because you're a safe space. You're their friend.
Yes.
Yeah.
And some of them had the false assumption that simply because I taught there, I couldn't be racist, which is as wrong as it could possibly be.
Absolutely.
So I said, listen, in this space, you know me, I know you. We exist in a trusting, honorable, safe, and loving space where we push each other to learn and to grow. As soon as I leave this building and I get in my Honda Civic and I drive around the corner, I am a white man in the car who's not going to get pulled over. And I'm a white man in the car who is the beneficiary of privileges I have not earned. And more so, my 2 sons are inheriting privileges that they did not earn. So am I racist? Yes. Am I trying not to be? Yes.
Yeah.
But those two things can exist at the same time. I wrote about that recently, and a lot of people did not really
Did not
dig
like it.
that. No.
So obviously, Zach, you do a lot of controversial work in a very white, fragile space. We're going to link to a bunch of that stuff in the show notes if you all want to learn more about it or engage in conversation. And while we, Zach and I, believe that this is really very true, we invite open discussion. We're not afraid of it. And so if you want to have these discussions with us, I shouldn't speak for you, Zach. Can people reach out to you if they want to have these conversations with you?
Absolutely. I love it. I absolutely love it. Some people say, like, how do you deal with these comments? Because some of the comments are pretty intense. There's nothing like teaching 18-year-olds for 10 years to give you a thick skin.
Right.
And also, I think I heard Obama say this once. He said something to the effect of, like, when someone comes at you, it's really not about you. It's more about, right? It's about what's being elicited within themselves. So, and being, I think, a teacher at heart, classes where people agree are boring.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, when we disagree, that's when the real learning happens. So someone can come at me with the most vitriolic stuff in the world, and I'll say, thank you so much for engaging. And I try to elevate the conversation to where we can both learn. We may not both convince one another, and that's okay too, but the conversation is where it's at.
Mm-hmm. Just to go back a second, this is interesting. I'm reminded when my oldest daughter was little, second, third grade, she's in 8th grade now. I remember one time, we're very rarely in the car alone because I have 4 kids, and she's sitting in the back seat by herself, and I'm driving, and we pull up to a stoplight, and it must have been February, must have been Black History Month, but I don't recall for sure. And she said, Mama, you know how a long time ago, people who look like me did really bad things to people who have brown skin? And I said, yeah. And she said, I feel really guilty about that. I feel bad. I feel like I'm responsible. I was like, oh, shit. And I said, Olivia, you weren't alive. You didn't make those choices. But I think it's good to know that that doesn't feel good. You don't want to be part of that narrative, and that you can make choices to not treat people poorly and to stand up for people if you see them being treated poorly. She was too little to really get into the whole systematic racism aspect of it. But I do have some hope that our children are being raised more aware of what they don't want, so that they can, or what they don't want to see, or how they don't want others to be treated, so they can maybe create change. I don't know. What's your thought on that?
I think, well, one, I think it's a beautiful moment. And I think what it presents is the fork in the road that we as white people who want to do good work, it's a fork in the road where it really decides the kind of person we're going to be. Because coming to that place of guilt is a powerful moment.
Right.
But where that's really tested is at Thanksgiving dinner.
Oh, boy.
Like, I can feel really guilty. But then at Thanksgiving dinner, if my oldest son hears an uncle or a cousin say some real racist stuff, and I don't speak out at the table, if I acquiesce because I don't want to make things uncomfortable, then I'm really not that guilty.
That's right.
Right? Then I'm really not that concerned, because the comfort at the table trumped justice.
The white comfort.
Right.
Yeah.
The guilt is necessary. But very often, I think that's where we stop.
Yeah.
And that's why I did this white fragility thing, where I just started posting excerpts.
Yes. So this is what I mentioned in the intro, and I'm excited to share this. So yeah, tell us, first of all, how did you decide to do this?
So it was around New Year's time, and I'm not much of a resolution person.
Okay.
Like, that's just, they don't work. But I said, this is something I can do. Like if one of my roles, particularly as not just a white person, but a white male, if one of my jobs is to speak to this issue, because a lot of white women do this, not a whole lot of white men do this.
Right.
So I said, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share this conversation out, and meaning from White Fragility, because like I can't put this book into people's hands, or if I do, I can't ensure that they read it. But if I put an excerpt on my Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, then it might get eyes.
Right.
So that's what I started to do. So I literally would just say White Fragility excerpt and have a quote and post it. So I didn't put any of my words in there. It was without commentary. And it was extraordinary.
I mean, without any context at all, it had to be outrageously shocking for people.
I think for some, some got zero response. Some got flooded responses. And some of them, and very often, the responses just proved the post. So
Sure.
For instance, there was one post about white women's tears, which is a new thing to me. I remember when the article came out, I think a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, I had not, this was an unknown phenomenon to me. It was one of my blind spots.
Yep.
Which now when I go to my black and brown colleagues and friends, they say, yes, it's a thing, right? It's
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
But that post was filled with comments of white women saying, how dare you?
Mm.
Which all I did was stand back and just say, yup, like this is it right here.
Yeah.
So it got a lot of play, but I gotta say I could tell something happened because 2 days ago, my uncle from Florida sent me an article. He's a doctor, and he sent me an article about racial bias in medicine.
Wow.
And he said, I read this thinking of you. So what that means to me is that my posting, without saying anything, made an older white Jewish man stop and read something he may not have read and thought about his practice. And that's all I can do, right? That's the goal. That's it.
What I think is so powerful about that is that's what it boils down to, is the importance of having these conversations with each other, with people who look like us, with other white people, because you don't start with the unconscious bias, right? So it's somebody they can identify with, they can trust, and they're more willing, people in general tend to be more willing to hear what you have to say and to look at something from a perspective they wouldn't otherwise have. And that isn't because in their head they're thinking, I don't trust this black or brown person, I don't want to listen to this person of color. It's because they're conditioned to not listen or to not trust that person of color.
Yeah, and one of the things I also always try to do whenever I write or speak about this is remind, like start off an article with, or remind throughout that, listen, I am as complicit and as wrong and as blind as anybody.
Yeah.
I there's some like the spectrum, right? The cultural competency spectrum from 1 to 10, right? 1, like totally like not into this conversation. 10 is like, right, the epitome of being enlightened, right? And people say, like, where are you on the spectrum? I would, in my personal opinion, I don't know if it's possible for a white person to really be beyond like 5. And I say that because if someone said to me, oh, I'm like an 8 or a 9, I'd be like, no, you're not. Like, you are not at all. Like, you just saying that proves you're not. So I think it's important to come to this work and come to these conversations with the knowledge that, like, I am awful. Like, I am just as wrong and blind as anybody, and just as hypocritical. You know, we lived in West Philadelphia. We moved to a small town in southern New Jersey, quote unquote, for the schools. What does that mean?
Right.
What does that mean?
The schools with fewer people of color.
Right. I mean, it could mean that. It could mean because there's more funding, which is inevitably a racial conversation based upon how we've redlined the country. So I think it's important to have these conversations with other white people with the understanding that because this is a racial system that is so much larger than all of us, we are all guilty. Now, that does not mean we are all bad people. It means we all have work to do. And those are two, in my opinion, two different things.
Yeah. It doesn't make you bad. I think that's that's the good bad binary, right? That's the whole concept is we don't want to, as a race of white people, we don't want to admit that any of this is reality because it doesn't feel good and it makes us think we're bad. But you're not bad. It's just honest. And once you know it's a problem, you can work to change it. Or more importantly, just acknowledging it. That was one of the most powerful things to me at the end of the book was when she asked a man of color what would happen if a white person recognized they had made a mistake or done something racist and apologized to you. And his response was, it would be revolutionary.
And think of how small an action that actually is.
Yeah.
Right. It's such a small action. It's something we ask our students to do every single day, to acknowledge that they've done something wrong and to learn for it. That's like the foundation of education.
Yeah. It was really powerful.
Yeah. And that's not to say that it's an easy thing to do. Right. I'm thinking of a meeting I was in months ago where I made a mistake in the meeting and I was called out on it. And I remember getting just so, like, I felt not just terrible, but I felt like the physical reaction, right? Like the heat on the back of your neck.
Your stomach hurts and your head pounds.
And I just breathed and said, thank you. I'm sorry. Won't happen again.
Was it a racist mistake, or was it just
it was a blind spot mistake?
Yeah. Okay.
It was speaking to something, and it was speaking about something of which I had incomplete knowledge, while assuming I had full knowledge.
All right.
Which is a very white male thing to do.
Sure.
And I love, and I saw a post recently that was like, if you think you have black and brown friends and they don't talk about white people in front of you, you really don't have black and brown friends.
That's the truth.
And that is the truth. And I think a lot of people say, well, they're racist for even talking about it. And I think this is where the colorblindness comes in. This is why colorblindness cannot be a thing, because we need to have these conversations, and we can't have these conversations if we are committed to colorblindness, which is essentially just committed to whiteness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And not honoring. And that was what my girls said around the dinner table the other day. And they said it before I had a chance to say it. So I was pretty proud of the fact that they're starting way ahead of where I did. Well, if we don't notice that everybody's different, then we don't notice what makes them special or what makes them unique or what their stories are or where they come from. I'm like, yes.
Yes. And being a parent of an amazing kid with special needs, it has been such an extraordinary gift, because we, a white family, and even though we're a white Jewish family, it's, we can hide Judaism, right? It's not a telling marker. We were now thrust immediately into a minority community that needs advocacy. And it was such a blessing, because we're learning.
Yeah.
That to me is what that's the foundation of it all. Whenever I say, like, I'm just learning here. I'm just learning, and learning involves making mistakes, and that's not what's important. What's important is I made the mistake. I'm like, I got it. I'm learning. Let's keep going.
Yeah. And it's not even a guarantee that you won't make that mistake again, but that maybe you'll recognize it right away the next time. And then perhaps the third time you won't make that mistake.
Right. In all odds, in all likelihood, I will almost definitely.
Probably.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What has been, and I hesitate to even ask this question, but I'm going to ask it. What has been the most difficult thing for you in doing this work? And I recognize that you're coming from this place of privilege, white male privilege, so which is why I hesitate to ask it. But I still think it offers valuable content. Yeah,
right. Difficult challenge is relative. I think in two ways. I think one is personal, one's professional. Personally, it was when we were making decision of what to do for my son's schooling.
Right.
And as I said, there are special needs, so that adds an extra variable to it. But what it laid bare was just, and there's no way to sugarcoat it, just the sheer hypocrisy of doing the work I do in classrooms in West Philadelphia and accessing the privilege I have for my children's education.
Yeah.
And how so diametrically opposed those two things are.
That is always such a difficult conversation because as the parent, you're like, okay, but should I take away something from my child that my child can have access to simply because other children don't have access to it?
Right. And I remember, I think it was my father who would say this, but I don't really know. It was something to the effect of, well, politics stops at your kids.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's true. I think there is nothing more political than
I don't think it has to. I think it does for many, but I don't think that's some sort of
right. Well, I think if we're honest with ourselves, it doesn't. Because, if we make political choices based upon taxes or laws, whatever the case may be, it really comes down to what's best for us. And what's best for us is usually about our kids.
Yeah.
So that was really difficult. Like, what do I do in this situation? And where I've come out of this, and this, again, could just be to make myself not feel awful, is to say, I do not begrudge anybody for their choice. What I do begrudge is people fighting for limiting the access of choice to other things.
Yeah.
And that is where I get into difficult conversations professionally, usually with people who are more aligned with me than not politically. And this is where we get into charter schools and etc. But to me, it comes down to a very basic idea. If we buy a house or rent a house or pay a tuition payment, we are accessing choice that is founded upon finance.
Mm-hmm.
If we say, knowing that and using that, if we do that and at the same time say that family should not have a charter school in their neighborhood because it, quote unquote, depletes public education, I am denying that family choice. I'm denying that family the ability to choose for themselves. What I'm saying to that family is, you are stuck. You are stuck with the school that is your catchment zone into that neighborhood, and we'll get it together soon, we promise. That I can't have.
Right. That's a whole nother episode, the charter school versus traditional public school discussion.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you on that. What has been the greatest pleasant surprise through this work?
I think one of the pleasant surprises, I think, is just, I really don't know. It could be my uncle sharing that article. Yeah. That was really nice. It could be my mom coming and just always wanting to talk about this. And my mom is one of those people the book was written for.
Right, right.
A really good, amazing person with blind spots everywhere. And this was not a book that was calling her a name. It was a book that says, you are awesome, and here are ways to empower to become better. So that is really awesome.
Perspective.
Yeah, that is really awesome. I think the amount of people who have come out and said thank you for this. I think so. It was a couple weeks ago. I put this on a Philadelphia educators Facebook page, and I was briefly kicked off. I think I'm back on now.
Oh,
I was briefly kicked off, and I don't know if it was because of these white fragility excerpts. I don't know if it was because of what I've said about other things, whatever. But what was fascinating was how a lot of my friends and colleagues who are Black and brown asked, "Are you going to stop?"
Yeah.
And I said, "No. One, it's just a Facebook group. This is not like a real hit. And two, no, this only shows that you got to keep going." So what that question really was to me was like a challenge and support.
Yeah.
So that was really nice, I suppose.
I love that. That's a powerful question. Are you going to stop? They wanted to know, were you actually on their side or not?
Yeah. And again, and I kind of take issue with that question because I really don't. That is not me having skin in the game, right? Being like a Facebook group, like that's not serious, right? That's not like a legitimate problem. So I don't know. I don't think I've gotten. I don't know. I think the question is difficult because I don't feel joy in this.
Right.
I feel excitement and intellectual curiosity and passion in this. I
Yeah.
don't know if I feel joy in this.
Understood, but all of those things, the excitement, the intellectualness, the fact that you can see that even in some tiny ways you're causing other people to think differently or more deeply about the topic is a pretty great side effect. That doesn't mean you should get some sort of medal for it. It doesn't mean you're extra special, but it's just a little bit of a motivation to continue to know that it's making a difference. It's really hard to do any sort of work when you never, ever, ever see a positive result from it. And that leads me into a question that I ask every single episode, because to me, that's something to celebrate. It doesn't mean that you slow down. It doesn't mean that you've got it figured out, but it gives you a little bit of motivation moving forward. We did an episode totally unrelated to this called Still Brave with a man named Tattoo Tom, which is a really phenomenal episode. He lost his daughter Shayla to childhood cancer and has dedicated his life to helping children and families who have cancer. And when I ask him how he celebrates, he's like, I'm not celebrating anything. As long as there's childhood cancer, we don't celebrate. But then that shifted. Okay, well, sometimes I do. Sometimes I celebrate a child who smiles or a parent who sighs a little bit of relief because we've offered them some support. Because you can't just always be surrounded by the bad and the hard and the negative as humans. If we don't have something good showing us that we're doing the right thing, you're going to shut it down.
Right.
So,
well, to me, though, I know this is about the white fragility thing, but to me, it always just comes back to my students. That's where I find
For
joy.
sure.
And so I went to the University of Vermont, and
there are no black or brown people in Vermont, are there?
So
I'm not trying to be an asshole. I'm serious.
So I, with several others, created a scholarship. So students from the school network I taught in, up to 5 a year, get full ride scholarships to University of Vermont. And so now we're up to almost 20 students over the last couple of years. And so the other day, one student posted her scholarship award of $188,000.
Wow.
And so, and the students who are there are changing that place.
That's awesome.
Like, they are changing that place.
And what work they're doing to go into this all white space with all of this stuff, that's hard work.
It's hard work. And, I have a lot of thoughts about it, about who's benefiting and et cetera. But they're changing it and they're doing that work. So the other day I was walking through one of these schools and I saw a list of schools to whom there are special relationships, and University of Vermont was one. And that brought me joy, because that started from literally a phone call in 2009.
That's powerful.
And has grown into a scholarship.
So how do you celebrate those moments?
I'm not a very good celebrator. I am notorious from my wife and colleague perspectives. Like, I'm notorious for just not hearing the positive. I just, I will listen and hear the negative and just gloss over the positive.
That's too bad.
It is what it is. It's who I am. And I gotta say, it keeps me wanting to do better. Mm-hmm. And I think I know that I do good stuff and that I can do it well at times. And that's enough.
What I love about celebration, though, is that it adds connection. So in my mind, you're talking about these scholarships and hearing this young woman say she's received one. To me, reaching out to her to say, I'm so excited for you is a form of celebration, right? It creates deeper connection and conversation.
So I do that.
All right. Well, then call it a celebration and feel good about
Okay,
it.
then there you go. And that's what I do. Like, so I shared her post. I said, congratulate this student. And all of my, network congratulated her, and all the students who are at UVM now congratulated her. So it's like this community she's going to be joining. So that was really great. So there you go. There's a celebration.
But I guess the reason I push you on that, and for the listeners to hear, is that there are a lot of ways to celebrate, and just convincing yourself that you're a negative Nelly, that you don't ever find the good and blah, blah, blah. I kind of call BS on it. And we all have ways to make ourselves feel connected and feel better, and recognizing those, being aware of them is healthy emotion.
Fair enough.
I have loved this conversation. I would love to have subsequent conversations with you, whether we're on the show or we're not on the show. I want to stay in touch for sure. At this point, though, I have to ask the last big question and wrap up the episode. What is your favorite charitable organization to support?
If I had to think of one, and bottom line, I need more. And I don't know if it's actually really good, but I really like Heifer International. I don't know if it's actually like a good one, but
from my understanding, it is. But we're
okay, good. So I like that. I tried this year. So we're a Jewish and Christian family, as I was growing up. So we do Hanukkah and Christmas. So what we try to do is we try to have Hanukkah be 8 days of giving.
Love that.
And Christmas is where you receive stuff. It sounds better than it actually plays out. But
there's your negative side.
Well,
Goes that go.
Tried. So I try to sit my son down and say, so this is the day that we're giving. So let's go through the catalog, and he'll say, bag of ducks, and then that's it. So that.
Do you use it as a learning opportunity? Do you talk about why you're giving and what you're giving and to whom you're giving it?
Yes, we try, we do it, and it never, in your mind, it's like this beautiful moment, and in reality, it just is another moment when they're running between activities. So we do the best we can.
I'm sure that it does create change for them. At least it puts it in their frame of reference, which is nice. So I ask everybody every week, get to know these organizations. Do you want to tell everybody a little bit about what the Heifer organization does?
So I again, I don't know a huge amount about it. I just know that essentially for developing nations across the world, it gives them ways to become economically sustainable through agriculture, through farming, through planting, through selling, and that the gifts can be as small as literally a basket of ducks to as large as like a Noah's Ark that can help an entire community.
Yeah, I love that. I actually do think it's a really powerful organization. And there are a lot to pick from. But I deeply believe that giving and being connected both internally in your community and externally at the world at large is hugely impactful, and it creates powerful, powerful change. Zach, can you share your 3 words with us one last time?
Absolutely. They were honesty, discomfort, and uncertainty.
So we spoke to honesty and we spoke to discomfort. Can we speak to uncertainty?
Yes. I think the moment as a white male, the moment I become certain in my goodness is the moment my work has stopped being productive. I think to be uncertain is to be willing to learn. And that is the most important thing.
I love that. I want you to celebrate. I want everybody to celebrate their wins and their successes, but you've never really arrived, have you? Not if you're doing it right. There's always more to learn and ways to grow and change. And I hadn't thought of it in terms of uncertainty, probably because I'm a half glass full and you're a half glass empty kind of person. But I hear it and I honor it. Listeners, thank you for being with us on this conversation. If your hackles got raised, that's okay. We would love to talk with you about it, but do more work. Zach, I'd love to know, do you have any other books that you recommend? If this connected with people and they want to know more, what else would you personally recommend that they read?
If you're really interested in the way race plays out in terms of our real estate and where we live, I'm getting it right now. I love The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. I think that really breaks down how why we live where we live.
Okay.
And to me, as an educator, that is of profound importance because these things do not just happen. So I love that book. And I would say there's a great book of, I'll leave it at there. I'll leave it at for that one.
Okay. All right. Well, if you think of any others after we stop recording, you can send them to me and I can put them on the show notes. Always want to encourage everyone to continue to learn more. Knowledge is power for everyone, not just for you. It's power for everyone around you if you use it properly. This needs to be an ongoing conversation, listeners. There is so much work to be done. I can, where Zach says it's uncertainty, I can with certainty tell you, you never arrive. Perception. I know that this was maybe intense for some of you, and also full of gaps. There's so much we couldn't talk about or touch base on. If you haven't read White Fragility, you should. I really encourage you to do so and to share it with others. Don't be afraid to do the work simply because it's uncomfortable. It's got to be uncomfortable. It's important and powerful to be uncomfortable and to know that you're having really important conversations. It's necessary for change. Zach, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
All right, everybody. I enjoyed this conversation. I hope that you did as well. I look forward to talking with you next week. This is Heather Vickery reminding you today and every day to choose bravely. Today's show was brought to you by Audible. Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audibletrial.com/thebravefiles and browse their unmatched selection of audio programs. Download a title of your choice for free and start listening. It's that simple. Just head to audiotrial.com/thebravefiles. The Brave Files is proudly supported by Lost Format Apparel, a socially conscious clothing company. You already know that homelessness is a huge problem. Over 500,000 Americans are living without shelter and millions more without consistent access to everyday basics. My friends at Lost Format know that solving homelessness is a much larger problem than any one company or person can solve on their own. It requires teamwork, sacrifice, strength, and building communities through personal and professional relationships. And isn't that exactly what the Brave Files podcast is all about? That's why I'm proud to say that the Brave Files has partnered with Lost Format, and together we're working to change the face of consumerism in addressing homelessness. You can now get one of 2 fantastic shirts custom designed specifically for the Brave Files. Each order goes towards providing necessities to the homeless. We have one shirt that, of course, says choose bravely, and another that reminds you that brave is always greater than fearless. Head on over to vickeryandco.com/store to see both beautiful shirts and to check out the entire product line from Lost Format. All of their stuff is super soft and comfortable and has an amazing fit. Use promo code BRAVE to get 10% off of your Brave Files custom t-shirts. And if you have an order over $30, your shipping is free. I choose bravely to take the plunge to help solve homelessness. Are you with me?
Thank you for listening to The Brave Files. Be sure to visit thebravefilespodcast.com to access the show notes and discover fantastic bonus content. Music composed and produced by Matt Lewis of Union Music, LLC.
Special thanks to our editor and audio mix expert, Andrew Olson. I am eternally grateful for all that he does to make each week sound so fantastic. You can hear more of Andrew's work at findandrewolson.com.